Have you ever been hurt so deeply that your chest literally began to hurt? Have you ever been betrayed by the one you loved so much and gave up everything for? Watch and see how karma, so deserving, was served cold. The morning Thomas walked out of our bedroom, packed his suitcase, and handed me divorce papers was the same morning I discovered I was pregnant with his child. He had just been promoted to CEO, 23 years of marriage, erased in a single signature. But what he didn't know was that I had built the foundation of everything he now owned. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for 2 decades, I believed that standing behind a successful man meant sacrificing your own dreams, your own voice, your own identity. I put Thomas through business school while working 2 jobs. I designed the marketing strategies that launched his first startup. I networked with investors at charity galas while he shook hands and took credit. I raised our 2 children alone while he traveled the world closing deals. I was the shadow that made his light possible, and the moment he no longer needed that shadow, he turned on the lights and walked away. This is the story of how I took back everything I built, how I discovered my own worth, and how karma works in the most unexpected ways. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. I met Thomas Mitchell in 1990 in a crowded coffee shop near Boston University. I was 24, working as a junior marketing consultant while finishing my MBA at night. He was 26, charming, ambitious, with dreams bigger than his bank account. He talked about building an empire, about changing the tech industry, about leaving a legacy. I fell in love with his vision before I fell in love with him. 6 months later, we were married in a small ceremony with 30 guests. His parents didn't approve. They thought he was marrying beneath his station. My parents worried I was giving up too much too soon. But we were young and convinced that love and ambition could conquer anything. The first 5 years were hard. Thomas started a software consulting firm with 2 college friends, working out of our 1-bedroom apartment in Cambridge. I kept my consulting job, handling clients during the day and helping Thomas draft proposals at night. I reviewed contracts, built financial models, created pitch decks. When his partners wanted to give up after losing their biggest client, I was the one who found 3 new leads and convinced Thomas to keep fighting. By 2005, the company had grown to 20 employees. Thomas was named CEO. I was 7 months pregnant with our first son, Jacob. I had planned to take 3 months of maternity leave, then return to my consulting career. But Thomas sat me down one evening, held my hand, and said he needed me at home. The company was expanding too fast. He was traveling constantly. Someone needed to be the stable force for our family. I agreed, telling myself it was temporary, that once things settled, I would go back to work. I never did. Our second son, Daniel, was born 2 years later. By then, Thomas's company had landed a major contract with a Fortune 500 corporation. We moved to a larger house in Lexington. Thomas hired an executive assistant, a PR firm, and a personal trainer. He started appearing in business magazines and speaking at conferences, and I became the wife who organized charity events, hosted dinner parties for investors, and made sure his shirts were pressed and his schedule managed. People would ask me at those parties what I did. I would smile and say I was a full-time mom, but late at night, after everyone was asleep, I would pull out my old marketing textbooks and wonder what my life would have looked like if I had chosen differently. Still, I convinced myself I was happy. Thomas was successful, our children were healthy, and we had financial security. Wasn't that enough? But there were small moments, tiny cracks that I ignored. The way Thomas stopped asking for my opinion on business decisions. The way he introduced me at events as just his wife, never mentioning that I had an MBA. Or that I had helped build his first company. The way he would dismiss my suggestions with a patronizing smile, as if I couldn't possibly understand the complexities of his world. I told myself I was being sensitive. That he was under pressure. That this was just how successful marriages worked. One person shines, the other supports. I had chosen my role. I should be grateful, but deep down something was shifting, a quiet resentment that I pushed down every time it surfaced. A question I didn't want to answer. Who was I beyond being Thomas Mitchell's wife? The real change started in 2018. Thomas's company merged with a larger tech firm, and he was appointed Chief Operating Officer. It was the promotion he had been chasing for 5 years. I expected him to be happy, relieved even. Instead, he became distant. He started coming home later, barely speaking at dinner. When I asked if everything was okay, he would snap that I wouldn't understand the pressure he was under. Our older son, Jacob, was 16 and barely home, spending most of his time with friends or locked in his room. Daniel was 14, quieter, more observant. He noticed the tension between his father and me, though he never said anything. I threw myself into volunteer work, joining the board of a local women's shelter. It gave me purpose, something beyond managing a household that no longer needed much managing. The women I met there, survivors of domestic abuse and financial control, shared stories that resonated with me in ways I didn't expect. Many had given up careers for their partners. Many had lost their identities in their marriages. Many had no financial independence when they finally decided to leave. I started to see my own life reflected in their stories. One evening I came home from a board meeting to find Thomas in his office, door closed, speaking in a low voice on the phone. I heard him laugh, a sound I hadn't heard in months. When he came out 20 minutes later, he was distant again, barely acknowledging me. I should have asked who he was talking to. I should have trusted my instincts, but I didn't. I told myself I was paranoid, that work stress was making me imagine things. 2 months later, in January 2019, I accidentally saw a text message on his phone. It was from someone named Victoria. The message was brief. "Can't wait to see you this weekend. I miss you." My hands shook as I scrolled up. Months of messages, flirtations, plans, "I love yous." I confronted him that night. He didn't deny it. He said Victoria was someone who understood him, who didn't make him feel like a failure at home, who actually respected his work. He said our marriage had been over for years and I just hadn't noticed. He said he had filed for divorce that morning and his lawyer would be in touch. Then he packed a suitcase and left. I sat on the edge of our bed staring at the walls we had painted together 15 years earlier and felt my entire world collapse. The next morning, I woke up nauseous. At first I thought it was shock, grief, the emotional toll of everything crashing down. But when the nausea continued for 3 days, I took a pregnancy test. Positive. I was 45 years old, and I was pregnant. Thomas and I hadn't been intimate often in the past year, but there had been one night 2 months earlier, after a rare dinner where we had actually talked and laughed like we used to. I had thought maybe we were finding our way back. Apparently, I had been wrong. I called Thomas. He didn't answer. I texted him, "We need to talk, it's important." He replied 3 hours later, "My lawyer will handle everything. Please don't contact me directly." I didn't tell him about the pregnancy, not yet. I needed time to process what this meant. For me, for our children, for the future I had thought was secure and now seemed completely uncertain. For the first week after Thomas left, I barely functioned. I cried in the shower, stared at the ceiling at night, went through the motions of making meals no one ate. Jacob came home one evening, found me sitting in the dark kitchen, and asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was fine. He didn't believe me. Daniel stopped talking altogether, retreating into his room, headphones on, shutting out the world. I knew I was failing them. I knew I needed to pull myself together, but I didn't know how. Then, one morning, I received an email from Thomas's lawyer. It was a proposed divorce settlement. As I read through the terms, my blood went cold. Thomas was offering me the house and a small monthly alimony for 5 years. Everything else, the investment accounts, the stock options, the retirement funds, was listed as his separate property, acquired through his employment. There was no mention of my contributions to his first company. No acknowledgement that I had supported him for over 2 decades. No recognition that I had sacrificed my career so he could build his. I called the lawyer listed on the document. She was polite but firm. She explained that because I hadn't been formally employed by Thomas's company and because most of the assets were in his name, the settlement was generous given the circumstances. I asked about the years I had worked without pay, the strategies I had developed, the investors I had connected him with. She said that unless I had documentation proving my contributions, it would be difficult to argue for more. I hung up and sat in silence. That's when I remembered the boxes in the attic. Years ago, when we moved to the Lexington house, I had packed away old files from Thomas's early startup days. Contracts, pitch decks, email correspondence, meeting notes. I had kept them thinking they might be useful someday, or maybe just out of habit. I hadn't looked at them in over a decade. I spent the next 3 days going through every box, and what I found changed everything. There were contracts from 2001 and 2002 with my name listed as co-founder and chief marketing officer of Thomas's original consulting firm. There were email threads where I had negotiated terms with early investors. There were pitch decks I had designed, complete with strategies I had developed. There were financial records showing that I had invested $15,000 of my own savings into the company in 2003 when it was on the verge of bankruptcy. I had completely forgotten about that investment. Thomas had paid me back 2 years later, but the documentation showed that my capital had kept the company alive during a critical period. I took everything to a lawyer, a woman named Patricia Morgan, who had been recommended by the director of the women's shelter. Patricia reviewed the documents carefully, then looked up at me with a slight smile. She said I had a case, a strong one. Over the next month, Patricia built a legal argument that my contributions to Thomas's company constituted a business partnership, regardless of whether I had been formally employed. She argued that the assets he now claimed as separate property were, in fact, marital assets built on my unpaid labor, intellectual contributions, and financial investment. She also discovered something I hadn't known. In 2015, Thomas had transferred significant stock options into a trust, listing himself as the sole beneficiary. He had done this without my knowledge, effectively hiding assets that should have been considered marital property. Patricia filed a motion to contest the divorce settlement and requested a full audit of Thomas's financial records. His lawyer was furious. Thomas himself sent me a series of angry texts, accusing me of being vindictive and greedy. He said I was trying to destroy him out of spite. I didn't respond. I was done explaining myself to him. I was done shrinking to make him comfortable. For the first time in years, I felt something other than sadness or fear. I felt angry, and that anger gave me strength. In April 2019, 3 months after Thomas left, his company made an announcement. He had been promoted to Chief Executive Officer. The press release praised his vision, his leadership, his ability to transform the company into an industry leader. There were photos of him at the announcement event, smiling, shaking hands with board members. Standing next to him was Victoria, identified as the company's new director of communications. They looked happy, comfortable, like they had been together for years. Our son saw the announcement online. Jacob called me, his voice shaking with anger. He said he couldn't believe his father had thrown away our family for a promotion and a woman he barely knew. Daniel didn't call. He texted me a single sentence. I don't want to see him anymore. I felt a deep sadness for them, for the relationship they were losing with their father. But I also felt something else. Clarity. Thomas hadn't left me because our marriage was broken. He had left me because I no longer fit the image of the life he wanted. A CEO needed a different kind of partner. Someone younger, more glamorous, more connected to his professional world. I had been erased, not because I had failed, but because I had served my purpose. That same week, I went to my first prenatal appointment. The doctor confirmed I was nearly 4 months pregnant. She asked if the father was involved. I said it was complicated. She didn't push. As I lay on the examination table, listening to the heartbeat of the child growing inside me, I made a decision. I was going to have this baby. And I was going to build a life for myself and my children that didn't depend on Thomas Mitchell or anyone else. I started looking for work. It had been over 15 years since I had held a formal job, and my resume was painfully thin. But I had skills. I had an MBA. I had experience, even if it was unpaid. I reached out to old colleagues from my consulting days. Most didn't remember me. A few were polite but unhelpful. One, a woman named Rachel who had worked with me in the early 2000s, called me back. She was now a senior partner at a mid-sized marketing firm in Boston. She said they didn't have any open positions, but she would keep me in mind. I thanked her and hung up, trying not to feel defeated. 2 days later, Rachel called again. She said she had been thinking about our conversation. She asked if I would be interested in freelance consulting work, helping with a pitch for a major client. The pay wasn't great, but it was a start. I said yes immediately. The project was challenging. I was rusty, out of practice, struggling to remember software platforms and strategies that had evolved significantly since I had last worked. But I pushed through. I stayed up late, researched, rebuilt skills I had let atrophy. I delivered the pitch deck 2 days early. Rachel called me the next week. They had won the client. She said my work had been instrumental. She offered me a contract position, part-time, flexible hours. I could work from home. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I had earned it. For the first time in 15 years, I had a paycheck with my name on it, not because of the amount, but because of what it represented. I was rebuilding, slowly, painfully. But I was moving forward. In June 2019, 5 months after Thomas left, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Gerald Foster, a board member of the tech firm where Thomas was now CEO. He said he needed to speak with me urgently, in person, about a matter involving the company. I was confused but agreed to meet him at a coffee shop in downtown Boston. Gerald was in his mid-60s, well-dressed, with the calm demeanor of someone who had spent decades navigating corporate politics. He ordered coffee, made small talk, then got to the point. He said the board had become aware of certain financial irregularities in Thomas's reporting. Specifically, there were concerns about the stock options he had transferred into a private trust in 2015. The board was conducting an internal audit, and during that process, they had discovered documents from Thomas's original startup, the one he had founded in the early 2000s. My name was on those documents. As co-founder, as chief marketing officer, as an investor. Gerald asked me directly, had I been aware that I was listed as a co-founder? Had I received any compensation or equity for my contributions? Had Thomas ever disclosed my involvement to the board when the company went through its merger in 2018? I answered honestly. No, I hadn't been aware that my name was still on those original documents. No, I had never received formal compensation or equity. And no, I had no idea what Thomas had disclosed to the board. Gerald nodded slowly. He said the board was concerned that Thomas had misrepresented the origins of the company, potentially violating disclosure requirements related to the merger. If it could be proven that I had been an essential partner in the founding and growth of the original firm, and that Thomas had failed to disclose this, it could constitute fraud. I felt my heart pounding. I asked what this meant for Thomas. Gerald said the board was still investigating, but if the findings were substantiated, Thomas could face termination, legal action, and the reversal of certain financial benefits tied to the merger. He asked if I would be willing to provide testimony and documentation. I said I needed to think about it. He gave me his card and said to call him when I was ready. I sat in that coffee shop for an hour after Gerald left, staring at his business card, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me felt vindicated. Thomas had spent years diminishing my contributions, erasing my role, treating me like I had been nothing more than a housewife. Now, the very documents that proved my worth were threatening to destroy the career he had built on my back. But another part of me felt conflicted. If I testified, if I provided the documentation Patricia had already compiled, I would be actively participating in his downfall. Our sons would see their father disgraced. His reputation would be ruined. Was I willing to do that? I called Patricia. She listened carefully, then said something I will never forget. She said this wasn't about revenge. This was about truth. Thomas had made choices. He had hidden assets, misrepresented history, and walked away from his family without a second thought. If those choices had consequences, that was on him, not on me. I called Gerald the next day. I said I would cooperate fully. Over the next 3 months, the board's investigation intensified. I provided documentation, sat for interviews, and answered questions about my role in the early years of Thomas's company. Patricia coordinated with the board's legal team, ensuring that my cooperation didn't jeopardize my own divorce case. In August, the board released a preliminary report. It confirmed that Thomas had failed to disclose my contributions during the merger, had improperly transferred stock options into a personal trust, and had misrepresented the founding structure of his original company. The report stopped short of accusing him of fraud, but recommended further investigation. Thomas was placed on temporary leave. The news broke in the business press. Articles described the controversy, the investigation, and the allegations. Thomas's name, which had been celebrated just months earlier, was now associated with scandal. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. Our sons were struggling. Jacob had started seeing a therapist, trying to process his anger at his father. Daniel had shut down completely, refusing to talk about any of it. I was 7 months pregnant, working part-time, navigating a contentious divorce, and watching my family fracture in real time. In September, Thomas called me. It was the first time we had spoken directly since he had left. His voice was quiet, strained. He said he needed to talk. I agreed to meet him at a neutral location, a park bench near the Charles River. When I saw him, I barely recognized him. He had lost weight. His face was drawn, tired. He looked like a man who had lost everything. He sat down next to me and didn't speak for a long time. Then he said he was sorry. He said he had been arrogant, selfish, and blind to everything I had sacrificed. He said he had convinced himself that his success was entirely his own, that I had simply been along for the ride. He said he realized now how wrong he had been. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I asked why he was telling me this. He said it was because he wanted me to know that he understood. He understood what he had lost. He understood what he had destroyed, and he understood that it was too late to fix it. I looked at him and felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not satisfaction, just sadness. Sadness for the marriage we could have had. Sadness for the partner he could have been. Sadness for the years we had wasted pretending everything was fine. I told him that I didn't forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I also told him that I wasn't trying to destroy him. I was simply standing up for myself, for the first time in over 2 decades. I was claiming the value of my contributions. I was refusing to be erased. He nodded. He said he understood. Then he asked about the baby. I hadn't told him directly, but by that point it was obvious. I was visibly pregnant. I told him the truth. That I was due in November. That I didn't expect anything from him. That I would raise this child with, or without his involvement. He asked if he could be part of the baby's life. I said that would depend on whether he could be the kind of father this child deserved. The kind of father he hadn't been to Jacob and Daniel in recent years. He said he would try. I said trying wasn't enough. He needed to show up, consistently, not when it was convenient, but when it mattered. He said he would. I didn't believe him, but I also didn't close the door completely. Time would tell. In October 2019, the board concluded its investigation. Thomas was formally terminated as CEO. He was required to return certain stock options and financial benefits tied to the merger. He was not charged with fraud, but his reputation was permanently damaged. He quietly settled the divorce on terms far more favorable to me than his original offer. I received half of the marital assets, including a significant portion of the retirement funds and investment accounts. I also received compensation for my early contributions to his company, calculated as back pay for the years I had worked without formal acknowledgement. It wasn't everything I had lost. You can't quantify 2 decades of sacrifice in a dollar amount, but it was enough. Enough to secure my future, enough to provide for my children, enough to start over. In November, I gave birth to a daughter. I named her Grace. She was tiny, perfect, with dark eyes that seemed to see everything. Jacob and Daniel came to the hospital to meet her. They held her carefully, awkwardly, these teenage boys suddenly confronted with the fragility of new life. Jacob looked at me and said she was beautiful. Daniel smiled for the first time in months. Thomas came to the hospital 2 days later. He stood in the doorway, hesitant, as if unsure whether he was welcome. I invited him in. He sat in the chair next to my bed and looked at Grace for a long time. Then he asked if he could hold her. I said yes. He cradled her gently, his hands shaking slightly. He whispered that he was sorry for everything he had put us through, sorry for the pain he had caused, sorry for the time he had wasted. I didn't respond. I just watched him hold our daughter and wondered if he truly understood what he had lost, or if he ever would. Over the following months, Thomas made an effort to be present. He visited Grace regularly. He attended Jacob's soccer games and Daniel's school events. He was never going to be the father he should have been, but he was trying. And for now, that was something. As for me, I continued working. Rachel's firm offered me a full-time position in early 2020. I accepted. I hired a nanny to help with Grace. I rebuilt my career slowly, carefully, on my own terms. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and rediscovered parts of myself I had buried for years. One evening, about a year after Grace was born, I was sitting on the back porch of our house, watching the sunset. Jacob came outside and sat next to me. He asked if I was happy. I thought about it for a moment. Happy wasn't the word I would have chosen. I was healing. I was rebuilding. I was discovering who I was beyond the role I had played for so long. But happy? Maybe. In small moments. In the sound of Grace's laughter. In the quiet conversations with my sons. In the satisfaction of work I had earned. In the knowledge that I had survived. I told Jacob that I was getting there. He nodded. Then he said something that stayed with me. He said he was proud of me. Proud that I had stood up for myself. Proud that I hadn't given up. Proud that I had shown him and Daniel what it looked like to fight for your worth. I hugged him tightly and realized that maybe, just maybe, something good had come from all of this pain. My sons had learned that love without respect is not enough, that sacrifice without acknowledgement is not noble, that you can rebuild even when everything falls apart. It has been 3 years since Thomas handed me those divorce papers. 3 years since my world collapsed and I had to rebuild it from the ground up. Grace is a joyful, curious 3-year-old who loves books and dancing and asking a million questions. Jacob is in college, studying engineering, and calls me every Sunday to check in. Daniel is in his senior year of high school, quieter than his brother but with a sharp sense of humor and a deep empathy I didn't expect. Thomas and I are not friends. We're not even truly co-parents in the traditional sense. But we have found a way to exist in each other's lives without constant conflict. He sees Grace regularly. He shows up to school events. He pays his child support on time. It is not the family I imagined when I married him 23 years ago, but it is the family we have, and I have learned to accept that. As for me, I am still working, still growing, still discovering who I am outside of the roles I played for so long. Some days are hard. Some days I wonder if I made the right choices. Some days I grieve the life I thought I would have. But most days, I wake up and feel something I didn't feel for years. I feel free, free to make my own decisions, free to build my own career, free to define my own worth. If I could go back and tell my younger self anything, it would be this. Never lose yourself in someone else's dream. Never sacrifice your voice for someone else's comfort. Never believe that your worth is tied to how well you serve another person. You are valuable. Your contributions matter. Your dreams are just as important as anyone else's. And if someone cannot see that, if someone diminishes you or erases you or walks away the moment you are no longer useful, that is not love. That is convenience. And you deserve so much more. So to anyone watching this, anyone who has ever felt invisible in their own life, anyone who has ever wondered if they gave too much, I want you to know something. You are not alone. Your story matters, and it is never too late to reclaim your worth. What would you have done if you were in my position? Would you have fought back, or would you have walked away quietly? Let us know in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or reflect on your own life, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. My boyfriend says I can't get 1,000 subscribers on this channel. Please help me prove him wrong by subscribing and dropping a comment. Thank you for watching. And remember, you are stronger than you think.